3 years ago, when I first stepped into the area behind Carian, I was puzzled. This area is called the Three Sisters and is home to three rises. But what three sisters? The Carian royal family doesn't have three sisters. Or does it? Before the DLC, I thought that the Three Sisters was referring to the three rises. In matter of fact, this is only half the truth. In the DLC, we received the revelation that Rennala had a younger sister, Rellana. This made me dig deeper in the history of the Carian royal family and the real mythology that revolves around the moon. And I finally discovered the third missing sister, the long-lost Carian princess that was erased from history, Rena, the snowy crone and the elder of the three sisters. Let me explain. All over world mythology, the moon was always associated with women and water. Over the span of a month, the moon goes through 3 phases, and so does women with their monthly period. This made our ancestors associate women with the moon, and led to the birth of the triple goddess myth. The triple goddess myth had roots in most ancient religions, but in matter of fact, it wasn't popularized until recently with the emergence of neo-paganism, specifically Wicca neo-paganistic beliefs. In Wicca, they believe that the moon represents a triple goddess, the maiden, the mother, and the crone. Each one of those aspects represent a different moon phase, and naturally a different phase in a woman's life. The maiden is associated with the crescent moon, and indeed we can see the symbol of a crescent on Rellana's helm. The maiden is a young moon, full of vigor and beauty, but reckless and unable to make good decisions. She is a princess waiting for a prince on a white horse to take her away, and she would make terrible decisions for his sake. You know, like renouncing your lineage, leaving your family, and traveling to a war-torn land just to follow a redhead edgelord. The typical stuff. Of course, the maiden here is Rellana. The second archetype in the triple goddess belief is the mother. The mother is associated with the full moon. She is the pinnacle of womanhood. The idea of motherhood has long been associated with safety, love, security, and home. The mother would do anything for her children. Of course, the mother in the Carian royal family is Rennala. Rennala isn't just the mother of 3 of the most important demigods in Elden Ring, but she also possessed the Amber Egg. In our fight with Rennala, we can literally see her giving birth to new children. She is also associated with the rebirth mechanism. This leaves one archetype, the crone. The old witch associated with, you guessed it, the dark moon. The crone is an old woman, attributed with death, usually viewed as bitter and abandoned. Yet she is a very wise woman. She seeks more solitude. Others seek her out for guidance and she welcomes them. She has a wide perspective, gained from years of experience. She holds the wisdom, teaches, and shares the stories with those who will listen. The crone is indeed present in Elden Ring. She was the secret mentor of Ranni. What Ranni may or may not have known, the snowy crone was actually her secret aunt. The snowy crone is one of those characters that had a big hidden impact on the lands between. There are a lot of items that mention her. Let's start with reading the description of the Snow Witch hat together. Once worn by the snowy crone who the young Ranni encountered deep in the woods. She was a witch and well versed in cold sorceries. It is said that the doll that houses Ranni's soul was modeled after her. That old witch was Ranni's secret mentor. We learned from the description that Ranni learned a lot from the snowy crone. Even her doll body was modeled after her. And just like the myth, the snowy crone was also associated with the dark moon in Elden Ring. We can learn from all the ice sorceries that the snowy crone warned Ranni of the dark moon, hinting at a previous encounter between the snowy crone and the dark moon. So Elden Ring follows the triple goddess myth. But instead of a triple nature character, we get 3 sisters. Each one of them represent a phase in a woman's life and the moon phase. and that's why Rena, the snowy crone, is a third missing sister. But how do I know that the snowy crone name was Rena? There are actually a couple of clues. The first one is the name of the three rises behind Carian Manor, the three sisters. In the middle we can find Rani's rise, which belonged to Rinala back in the days. Then we have Silva's rise, which belonged to Rilana before getting erased from history. The third rise is called Rena's rise, and indeed inside of it we can find the snowy crone set. Another clue is the usage of the name Rena by Rani during our first encounter with her. As we already established, Rani wore the snowy crone set and her doll body was modeled after the snowy crone. So it's really logical that she also used her name when she went undercover. The final nail to the coffin is that Rena starts with an R, which follows the naming convention of the Carian royal family. It's been said many times now, but J.R.R. Martin likes to give a naming convention to every royal family, and the naming convention of the Carians is an R. We got Rinala, Rani, Radon, Rykard, Rilana, and now Rena. After establishing all of this, let's try to discover more of the erased history of Rena. And in order to do that, we must go back and unravel the dark history of the Carian royal family, specifically their origins as astrologers and their original home, the mountaintops of the giants. The mountaintops of the giants was home to several races back in the days before the Golden Order. It was home to the giants, the Zamor warriors, and we can find several abandoned rises. Those rises were home to the ancient astrologers. You see, the mountaintops is the closest point to the sky in the lands between, which is perfect for stargazing. Before the astrologers turned to moon worship on the hands of Rinala, they worshipped the stars. So naturally, the mountaintops was the perfect home for them. Let's read the Stargazer heirloom together. A talisman engraved with the legend of a queen. The young astrologer gazed at the night sky as she walked. She had always chased the stars every step of her journey. Then she met the full moon, and in time, the astrologer became a queen. The heirloom is clearly talking about Rinala, specifically how she turned from an astrologer to the queen of the full moon. This shift is incredibly important for the lore of Elden Ring. It marks the departure of the astrologers from the mountaintops to Liurnia. As we established, the astrologers stayed in the mountaintops to stargaze, but when they became moon worshippers, they needed a new home, a home connected to the moon. And of course, the moon has always been associated with water. That's why they took Liurnia of the lakes as their new home. But some people didn't like that, specifically the snowy crone, Rinala's older sister. We learned from ice sorceries that she feared the dark moon. Perhaps that's why she refused to worship the full moon, and that's why she didn't leave with her sisters. She stayed at the mountaintops of the giants. This explains why she is so good at ice sorceries. She never left with her sisters and never shifted to more modern types of magic. In matter of fact, there is another very hidden clue about this. All of the ice sorceries doesn't feature a sigil, which is quite weird since almost all of the other sorceries feature one. So perhaps the sigil was erased from history and forgotten, but we can still find hidden remnants. We can find the forgotten crest on the ice crest shield, which actually states explicitly that it belongs to a Carian princess. At first, I thought it was talking about Rani, but after what we established, it clearly talks about the Snow Witch, which explains why the ice sorceries doesn't feature a sigil and further proves that the Snow Witch was the third Carian princess. The Snow Witch isn't the only mysterious member of the Carian royal family. In matter of fact, there are two more characters, Sorceress Selen and Count Ymir. Starting with Sorceress Selen, she was actually a part of the Carian royal family, a fact missed by a lot of people. She's the one that told us that Rani's fate as a Carian is tied to the stars, and therefore Radahn must die to free Rani's fate. But what most people miss is that Selen's fate is also tied to the stars, a fact that E.G. tells us. Let's hear this piece of dialogue together.
Now the festival is over, and General Radahn is defeated. Jaren's duties are finally fulfilled. Though we served different masters, I could see he was truly adept in his role. Now the time has come to remind him of an old promise made. With the stars of fate set into motion, a certain sorceress is dispossessed of her immortality. Finally, we can be rid of a long-standing Carian weed.
E.G. clearly tells us that Selen's fate was tied to the stars, which makes her a part of the Carian royal family. He also calls her a Carian weed, which means she is an unwanted member of the Carian royal family. But in that context, who exactly is Selen? In order to understand the full story behind Selen and the inspiration behind the Carian royal family, we should look at Greek mythology. The name Selen is actually the name of the goddess and personification of the moon in Greek mythology. This wasn't always the case though. Selen was the original goddess of the moon. Later on, the moon got associated with the goddess Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, night, and fertility. Artemis is very important here because Caria was actually a real place in the world. It resides now beside modern-day Turkey. The most famous ruler of Caria was actually called Artemisia I, named after the goddess Artemis. Artemisia was the ruler of Caria. She was a strong and fierce warrior. She allied with Xerxes I of Persia against the Greek, and she led the naval forces. If you are familiar with the 300 movie franchise, then you saw Artemisia. She was portrayed by Eva Green in the second installment in the series, 300 Rise of an Empire. Despite being a horrible movie in comparison to the first installment, they did portray Artemisia I in a very strong manner, showcasing her fierce and ambitious nature while leading the Persian forces. I believe Rennala is inspired partially by Artemisia. Worth noting that Artemis was heavily associated with dogs, as she was the goddess of the hunt as we established. This can explain the relation between the Carian royal family and wolves. As stated by the wolf crest shield, the wolf is the beast of the Carian royal covenant, a symbol of the moon's pride that none can forget, no matter what remote lands they may arrive at. So Rennala became the head of the Carian royal family, and she's based on Artemis. So what about the original goddess of the moon, Selen? I believe this may reveal the position of sorceress Selen in the Carian royal family. Remember what we established about the 3 phases of the moon and women? How the snowy crone is associated with the dark moon because of her old age and wisdom? So what if she was chosen by the full moon in her younger days? What if she was the original queen of the full moon before the full moon abandoned her in favor of Rennala? This will follow the shift in moon worship between Selen and Artemis. I think sorceress Selen is the reincarnation of the Snowy Witch. We already saw with our own eyes how Selen can change bodies. She also tells us explicitly that this isn't the first time she changed bodies. She can do this using her primal glintstone. Let's read its description together. Glintstone from within the sorceress Selen's body, seemingly half alive. Blood vessels are visible within. In essence, a primal glintstone is a sorceress soul. If transplanted into a compatible new body after their original body dies, the sorcerer will rise again. This is very interesting when you combine it with other information. First, the term heretical witch is only used in conjunction with 2 characters, Selen and the Snowy Witch. We are told that the Snowy Witch used heretical sorceries, but what kind of sorceries are they talking about? When we reach the mountaintops of the giants, we find the heretical rise, which contain the founding stars of ruin, the first of the primeval sorceries. So the primeval sorceries were considered heretical after the astrologers shifted from the worship of stars to the worship of the moon. If the Snowy Witch is said to be a heretical witch, then she was a user of primeval sorceries. Combining this with the fact that the Snowy Witch was against the worship of the moon, we can reach an interesting conclusion. What if the Snowy Witch abandoned her old withering body and implanted her primal glintstone into another? She then went with the disguise of sorceress Selen, and she was trying to restore the primeval current. She hated the moon and wanted to undo what her younger sister did. That's why when Selen arrives at the academy, she seems to hate Rinolla. She wants to take her place. Indeed, she casts Rinolla aside and take her place at the center of the academy library. Of course, that didn't end well for her. This will also explain why Rani modeled her doll body after the Snowy Witch. She also used the name Rena to hide her true identity. This isn't possible unless Rena either died, which can't be the case because the rune of death was sealed, or as we said, abandoned her old body. I think this is a very plausible explanation that ties a lot of loose ends together. Now we should look at the newest addition to the Carian storyline, Count Ymir. Count Ymir is the newest addition to the Carian storyline in Elden Ring. He seems to be very important to the Carians, a very old scholar who knows so much about the world. He also instructed the Carian princess Rilana in the sorceress arts, which is a testament to his mastery and importance. Yet, we are told nothing about his story before abandoning the Carians, which is weird. But I believe his story was hidden inside the game for a very long time. The first thing you may notice about him is actually his name. He is referred to as a count, which is a royal title. But he doesn't follow the naming convention of the Carian royal family, which is weird unless Ymir isn't actually his real name. The name Ymir is very interesting. Ymir is a primordial being in Norse mythology, the first being to come into existence. He was the father of Bori and the grandfather of Bor. Bor is the father of Odin, the king of the gods. Later on, Odin killed Ymir and carved the world out of his dead body. Let's read this poem together. From Ymir's flesh, the earth was created, and from his sweat, or in some virgin's blood, the sea. Mountains from bone, trees from hair, and from his skull, the sky. So Ymir is the origin of all creation. All of the cosmos in Norse mythology came from him. Sounds familiar? This is literally what Count Ymir tells us about the greater will, that all came from him. I believe that's why FromSoft gave him that name. But inside Elden Ring, he probably changed his name to Ymir when he changed his allegiance. As Count Ymir tells us, he was a worshipper of the moon. Later on, he renounced the moon as it was merely the closest of celestial bodies, nothing more. I believe this is the exact moment he changed his name. Now the question remains, what was his original name? Very close to the Cathedral of Manusmeter, we can find a sorcerer rise. On top of the rise, we can find the puppet of Anna, the sword hand of night. From her ashes, we can learn that she was a puppet of Count Ymir. He is responsible for the state we find her in. She also invades us when we go down under the cathedral to face Meter. The rise we find Anna puppet in is called Rabbath Rise. I believe this was the original name of Count Ymir, which follows the naming convention of the Carian royal family. But the existence of Anna's body in the rise isn't the only evidence that Ymir is Rabbath. In matter of fact, this is only the tip of the iceberg. Inside the rise we can find two things, Rabbath Canon and his ball bearing. The canon tells us that Rabbath was a spell machinist. A spell machinist isn't a word that we use often, but being mentioned on an invention like the cannon probably means that Rabbath was an inventor, someone who created and was really good at making spells and magical inventions. Now we already have a connection between Rabbath Rise and puppets, which made me think that Rabbath may have been the one that invented the spell or the ritual needed to make a puppet. Then Sylvis, who was Bedia, the Carian servant in disguise, learned that process from Rabbath, but there is more. If we look at this item here, you may spot a familiar figure. This is the Carian inverted statue, which we can use to reveal the true form of the inverted Carian study hall. To me, this man here looks a lot like Ymir. This man is called a scholar in the item description. And we know that Ymir was indeed a very important scholar. He was so good that he instructed Rilana in the sorceress arts. But again, this isn't the only clue that connects Ymir to the Carian inverted hall. You probably remember the annoying NPC in the inverted hall that kept attacking you then vanishing. This NPC was called Miriam, and she was using a spell called Miriam's Vanishing. This spell was added for purchase in the DLC, and you can get it from, you guessed it, Ymir. The interesting part about this spell is that Miriam didn't invent it. The spell was named after her because of how good she was at using it. But then, who made the spell? The connections between Ymir and the inverted Carian hall cannot be a coincidence. I believe Ymir under his old name is the one that made the inverted hall as well as the vanishing spell. But what if we went even further in time? We already established that the Carians once lived alongside the giants in the mountaintops. The astrologers viewed the fire giants as their neighbors, as stated by the Sword of Night and Flame. I will make a video talking about the history of the giants very soon. But until then, I recommend a very good video by the lore tuber The Nameless Singer. What I want to talk about here is the existence of a collaboration between the fire giants and astrologers. There are many evidence supporting this, but the biggest evidence for now is the Sword of Night and Flame, which can use both the sorcery Comet Azure and the fire spell. I believe they also collaborated in making another weapon, the golems. The stone golems are said to be made by a civilization gone to ruin. This civilization are clearly giants. That's why they made the golems in their image. They also seem to operate using a core of fire. But there was someone else that helped the giants make the golems. We are told that a golem crafter used crystal tools to craft the golems. To this day, crystal darts can mess with the golems and turn them against each other. This property is shared with many artificial life forms, the golems, the imps, and the earthly burial watchdogs, which is weird. This golem crafter couldn't have been a giant himself, as the earthly and the giants were never allied. Rather, I believe the golem crafter was someone allied with the giants at a certain moment in time, then he allied with the earthly. The golem crafter was a Carian. That's why he was good at using crystal tools, an art taught by the Crystallians to the Carians. There is also a variation of the golems that can use magic, a magical laser beam and magic arrows. This Carian was none other than Rabbath, the spell machinist. Back when he was an astrologer, he made the golems for the fire giants. Then after the alliance between the moon and the earth tree, he made the burial watchdogs using the same technology, which explains even further why he was called a spell machinist. Again, this shows how much Ymir contributed to the Carians and the lands between over the ages. Hopefully, I was able to shed some light on the dark, erased history of the Carian royal family and tie a lot of loose ends together. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit the like and subscribe button and tell me what you think in the comments down below. Until next video, farewell, fellow Tarnished.